I wanted to finish up a few problems on your Chapter 9, page 1 core packet. So what I wanted to talk about were still just the three forms, where we had standard form, which looked like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, right? A, b, and c are all numbers, so it's nothing to be fearful there. Factored form, which should look something like y equals x and then plus some number or minus some number, and then x plus some number or minus some number. And then, of course, vertex form, which would look something like y equals a, and then we would have x. This would be a horizontal shift, left and right squared, plus a vertical shift. And we could use, like I've used before, an H and a K, or a B and a C, but probably B and C wouldn't be the best letters since they're reserved for in this form. Okay. All right, so I did, like I said, want to focus on whether a parabola would open up or down, and that's primarily because of your A value. If your A is positive, then the parabola is going to open up like that if it's a positive A value, and if your A were negative, then it would open down. And you can still tell in factored form, if this was x times x, that would be a positive x squared, and so our parabola would open up, versus if it was a negative a that was sitting out in front of here, then the parabola would open down. Okay? The other thing that I wanted to talk about was vertex, or vertices on a parabola, which is the point at the very, very top of your parabola, or the point at the very, very bottom of your parabola. And finding the x value is actually not real difficult on a parabola. It's really a little bit more tedious sometimes, because you not only have to find the x value, you also have to find the y value, and that's typically done by plugging in. So you have to find the x value, and then you also have to plug in. So let's go ahead and look at the first problem that we have here, letter A, and it says how to find a vertex in vertex form. So like it says, this should be pretty easy since it's in the correct form. It looks like the horizontal shift, our x value, always does the opposite. That's why there's a negative in this formula. And we did investigate that a little bit in Desmos. So our vertex is going to be the coordinate, and it says -1, so it's going to be +1. And then our vertical shift is down 4, so it's -4. So like I said, it's always the opposite of whatever it says here, or like you're setting this thing equal to 0. And then this one is exactly what it says. So +1, -4. Done. All right, looking through, going down to E, it says how to graph a parabola in standard form. And I don't want to graph the whole thing. That will probably be for another video. But if it were in standard form, how would I find the vertex? And one thing would be, if I could somehow find x-intercepts, it would be useful, right? If I could find a y-intercept, it would be useful to figure out what my parabola would look like. But you can't always just plug in points, right? So if I chose a random point like x is 1, I can go ahead and plug in that value. So I would say y equals something squared minus 2 times something minus 3. And that random value 1, I would just plug it in that spot. And I have 3 numbers. 1, 2, 3. What are those 3 numbers? It would be y equals 1 squared is going to be 1. -2 times 1 is going to be -2. And -3, of course, is -3. And so what that equals is, here I have -5, so I have 5 negatives and 1 positive, so I have more negatives. So it's going to be -1, and then I would end up getting -4, and that would be a point on my graph. Okay? I think it asks same kind of problem, right? This is the same parabola as before, and this time it's just asking whether it's opening up or down. And there's no number in front of the x squared, but it is just a positive x squared, just one positive x squared. Therefore, it's going to open up, and my graph would look like that. Okay? And then the last one here is in standard form, how do I find the vertex? So I could go after x-intercepts, which I think I've already done on a previous video, and then try to find the middle of them. But there is actually a formula to find the x part of the vertex. And the formula is this. You might want to write this down in an important place. X equals -b over 2a. Okay? Okay, and it's really, really important that you're careful when you plug these in, because if you mess this part up, it a lot of times messes your whole parabola up, because this is one of the more important points. So when I say a and b, I'm talking about just like with the quadratic formula. A is the number in front of x squared, b is the coefficient in front of x, and then c, which I don't need, is that number, because that's a vertical shift. Okay? All right, so I'm going to have negative b over 2a, and my b value is negative 2. Negative 2 goes right in that spot, and my a value is positive 1. So I have the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2, and then I have 2 times 1, which is 2. So that ends up being an x value of 1. And that actually is kind of interesting, because I did randomly choose this, but this was the actual vertex. So if I plugged in negative 1, or positive 1, into this parabola, I would have ended up getting negative 4. Okay? So with a vertex, you always have to do two things. First of all, you have to find the x value, and then you have to plug in, after you find the x value, you have to plug in x to find the y value. Okay? All right, so there's one more problem that I want to do, and I did allude to how I wanted to do it, and that was how to find the vertex, and this time it's in a different form. It's in, all I have are two x-intercepts, which would look something like this, negative 1, comma, positive 4. And on a previous problem, I already found the equation, or a possible equation for a parabola that would look like that. It would be y equals x plus 1, and it's right here, times x minus 4, right? Those x-intercepts helped me find the factors, which is a little bit backwards, but from here, well, I know that a parabola is symmetrical, so if the x values are negative 1 and positive 4, then the x part of the vertex has to be exactly in the middle. And what's exactly between 4 and negative 1? So if you weren't sure, you could always add them and divide by 2. So 4 and negative 1, if you added those, you would get 3, and 3 divided by 2 is going to be 3/2. So I would have 3/2. And like I said, with a vertex, it's not like an x-intercept or a y-intercept where if you have an x-intercept, y is 0, and if a y-intercept, x is 0, right? A vertex is, once you find the x value, you have to then take it, plug it in to find the y value. So if I plugged in 3/2 right here, if I plugged in 3/2 right there, I would get, instead of 3/2, that's like 1.5, right? I would have to add 1 to it. So y would equal 1.5 plus 1 would be 2.5. And then I'd have to do the same thing here. If I had $1.50 and I spent $4, which would be impossible, but I would end up with negative 2.5. And so obviously the answer is going to be negative because a positive times a negative. And 25 times 25 is 625. So that means my answer here will be negative 6.25. Okay? So hopefully that helps you out a little bit. If you look at the other video, it should help you with x and y intercepts. This video is more about whether a parabola would open up or down, how to find a vertex, and then of course with a vertex comes plugging in. Okay?